Hello, everyone. Happy International Translation Day. Um, uh, we are going to speak to you today about No Language Left Behind. I am Jeannette Stewart from Translation Commons, and with me is Craig Cornelius from Google. Both of us are part of the Language Digitization Initiative of Translation Commons. And today we will speak to you about what we plan to do in the next decade. Craig?
Thank you, Jeannette. My name is Craig Cornelius. I'm a software engineer at Google in the International Engineering Department. In addition to that work on Unicode Standard and other basic language support, I work with Translation Commons and have been an active participant in many of their initiatives. It's very exciting to work with this group, and I look forward to telling you more about what we are doing in this area.
In 2011, the UN declared that access to the internet is a basic human right. But we ask, in what language? Current data indicates that at least 40% of the 7,000 languages used worldwide are at some level of endangerment. While reliable figures are hard to come by, experts agree that Indigenous languages are particularly vulnerable because many of them are not taught at school or used in the digital sphere. In response, the UN declared 2019 the International Year of Indigenous Languages and created awareness to the intersection of language rights and digital rights. In February 2020, more than 500 participants from 50 countries, including government ministers, Indigenous leaders, researchers, public and private partners, and other stakeholders and experts, adopted the Los Pinos Declaration at the end of the two-day event in Mexico City, which was organized by UNESCO in Mexico. In its strategic recommendations for the decade, the Los Pinos Declaration emphasizes Indigenous peoples' rights to freedom of expression, to an education in their mother tongue, and to participation in public life using their languages. The declaration highlights the importance of enabling the use of Indigenous languages in justice systems, the media, labor, and health programs. It also points to the need of digital technologies in supporting the use and preservation of those languages. The declaration places Indigenous peoples at the centers of its recommendations with the slogan, "Nothing for us without us." This is a loaded statement, but it brings home the reality of mistrust prevailing in Indigenous communities. Both Craig and myself have been in a number of joint events where technologists and members of communities met to discuss. The single most important thing that became clear to both of us is that we don't realize and understand them, and they don't necessarily understand how and why we are trying to help them. Therefore, it is important to wait until they are ready to digitize and seek assistance. There is a great need for inclusion and trust building. We take these language access rights for granted, but 40% of the world's languages deemed as endangered do not have access and do not participate in any of these basic human rights. And although we are talking about Aboriginal and Sub-Saharan tribes, we are also talking about Mayan speakers, immigrants in Salinas, just around the corner from us. People that by right should have access to all these facilities in their language, and yet they don't because they're not in their language and they don't understand. During the Language Technology for All conference at the UNESCO headquarters in December 2019, most communities had the same wish. I just want to have the same digital experience that everybody else has, but in my language. As part of our partnership with the International Year of Indigenous Languages, and now with a decade, Translation Commons launched the Language Digitization Initiative to make it possible for all language communities to have equal access and opportunity to digitize. We created the document, and Craig is one of the authors, Zero to Digital, helping communities navigate the basic elements of digitizing their languages. Craig will tell us a bit more later. We also facilitated events in the language departments of 30 universities, which made UNESCO urge us to create a community of practice of professors to keep an active discussion. Each language in the world has a different digital footprint. Even some of the top 100 languages are not fully represented in the entire language technology workflow shown here. It is a complex and multi-stakeholder journey for any language to be fully developed digitally. Without font designs and input methods, thousands of endangered languages cannot even start this journey. Without educational material, there will be limited content. And without data sets, most languages will not have fully functional automation support and applications. Without properly trained linguists, knowledge will not be shared and cultural treasures will be lost. The goal of the Language Digitization Initiative is to bring together professionals, researchers, and language communities to support the digitization of endangered, indigenous, and minority languages, and to build capacity and professional networks to help all languages have equal opportunities and equal digital footprint online. It will take a global and multidisciplinary effort to bring all the languages online. But we have solutions, and these solutions are found in partnerships. As you have seen from the previous slide, the only way to truly make a difference is by mobilizing a great number of diverse organizations and people with multiple skill sets. Along the way, we acquired too many partners to name here. Here, of course, are a few. With the decade approaching, we will be inviting more people and organizations, both nonprofits and corporations, to join us and help us in this huge task of language technology for Indigenous communities. The Translation Commons team is very big to name everyone. The advisory board coalesced around the International Year of Indigenous Languages back in 2019. We are offering the tech arm to UNESCO in its broad efforts to support the world's languages. The team grew considerably with COVID-19 projects, a poster in 352 languages, and managing the translations for open source medical supplies, helping thousands around the world ensure there are no shortages. Today, we're like a family, a bunch of friends with lots of ideas, always discussing timely issues and having lots of fun. In our advisory group, there are many technology experts and linguists. We have keyboard experts, we have linguistics, we have terminology experts and ISO, we have script encoding experts, internationalization experts, Unicode and CLDR experts, and computational linguistic experts. And as I mentioned before, Craig is co-presenting today with us, and I will leave the rest of the presentation to Craig.
Thank you, Jeannette. I'm very happy to tell you more about what the Language Digitization Initiative does to support language communities. We have a series of resources that are available, starting with the Zero to Digital, which is a high-level map of our ideas and help for Indigenous communities. We have some guidelines, videos, workshops, educational material, and other things that we'll be talking to you about in more detail in the next few slides. One of the first resources that we developed for the Language Digitization Initiative was the Zero to Digital document. It is a series of questions in a flowchart to help communities and those working with them to determine the status of their language and readiness for implementing digital tools. One of the first questions in this flowchart is, does your language have a written form or not? If it does, then we proceed with the work that was largely discussed, or that will largely be discussed with the language technologies that we're all familiar with, because most of us use text. However, languages that don't have a written form, or that do not have very much use of a written form, are still very important to consider in the digitalization initiative. And that's because there are video and audio resources, and almost anyone can make these now and make them available. One of the next questions in the language guideline is there a standard code that is used for your language? And this is really important because even though there are digital resources out there, many times it's very difficult to find them. And to be able to say, this is the language code that is associated with a particular digital document or an audio or video file is very important. So one of the next questions is there a code for your language? After a series of questions are asked, then people who are working with the communities and the community members themselves can get a better grasp on what materials they need to develop, what things they need to gather, and what kinds of organization they need to get their languages in shape for better support in the digital world. We also have a number of guidelines that have been developed, and they are associated with the Zero to Digital document. One of these is the Language Data Gathering Guidelines. And this is very important because data gathering is something that needs to be done for support for a language beyond just the ability to type and the ability to read text. We have advice on what kinds of data to gather. Typically, we encourage people to get a large quantity of information, everything that's available, and a wide variety of materials so that people really understand what kinds of things are going to be helpful for fully bringing their languages online. We also outline procedures for gathering it, and this involves methods of working with communities that have been practiced by linguists and other folks who work with Indigenous communities, and also ways of storing that data and what kinds of repositories can and should be used for such things. It's also important to keep in mind that different kinds of data support various applications. For example, data that's in tabular form may fit with some kinds of applications, whereas raw text or narrative would fit better with word processing documents. So the type and the amount of data is very important to understand, and we have guidelines for these. Another aspect of language support involves more sophisticated processing of data, and this is needed for things such as spell checking, autocorrection, predictive text, and even optical character recognition and other advanced digital functions. This goes beyond just being able to type and read text and produce documents, and moves to the concepts that are in linguistics itself. One aspect of this is the so-called semantic triangle, where the idea of a concept such as the general object or general concept of cat is connected to the designations that different languages would use for cat. And so we have in 3 languages here, English, Cherokee, and German, ways of representing that concept of cat with one word. Of course, there would be other words in some of these languages, such as kitty or fuzzy or whatever language terms are used for a particular cat. And then when we're talking about a particular individual referent of that concept, we can talk about the particular animal in this case that we're speaking of. So developing the terminology for a language is extremely important. This is done with a lot of linguistic knowledge. Many linguists have worked for many years on understanding how to gather such data, help people organize it, and the semantic triangle is one of the tools. There are many problems in creating new terminology for computer use as well. When an Indigenous community does not have a lot of experience with technology, they need to develop terms for things like files and keyboards and documents that may not exist in the language. One example that I really love is that when Sequoyah, the Cherokee man who invented their writing system almost 200 years ago, was working on his way of writing, people called books talking leaves because they were familiar with leaves, and talking leaves was a good poetic reference to what books were at that time. And when my Cherokee friends were working with our translators to develop the user interface for Gmail in the Cherokee language, they had to come up with a term for email because that didn't exist natively in Cherokee. The term in Cherokee for email is a beautiful phrase, lightning paper. And similar aspects of language development, terminology coining, need to be done for almost any language because new concepts need a way to be expressed. Many concepts that might not exist outside of the culture also need to be expressed in ways that can be shared. There may be different ways of thinking about things. There are probably grammatical differences between languages that have to be considered. And language terminology is really quite a tricky area. It works best when there are linguists who have the trust and experience with the native communities that they're working with to develop things such as dictionaries and lists of words and other linguistic tools for more advanced processing. One of the most advanced capabilities that people hope to use for their languages is machine translation. And most of us are probably familiar with some of the translation tools that are available online, and we know that they work fairly well. Machine translation is a topic that everyone hopes that they can get working for their language. I've actually had people ask me how much time it would take to develop Google Translate because they have shown me the dictionary for their language. But a dictionary is not nearly enough information to actually develop machine translation. At a high level, machine translation is pattern matching between languages when there is parallel text in one language and another language, and a lot of examples of phrases that are directly related to phrases in another text. Then machine learning can be used to find the best correlations and best matches for the phrases in a target language from a source language. For example, if I were translating from English to German, we would have a lot of English and German parallel text. For the big languages that are on the internet now, ones with a lot of support, there are millions and millions of words that are used in the machine translation technology to train the systems. However, most small language groups, most small communities do not have the millions of words in parallel text that are needed. And so the technology guidelines that we have developed ask key questions of communities about their capabilities, about the data that's available before starting on machine translation. We hope that this will give people a more realistic view of what is feasible and give them an idea of what kinds of data they would need to gather if they really want to get machine translation working. There are special challenges for Indigenous languages. Many times the grammars of Indigenous languages are very different than those of the dominant languages in a community or dominant languages on the internet. And grammar is just one of the many things that has to be considered when people are thinking about machine translation. Other variations such as different spelling, variations in dialects, and what is considered to be a language versus a dialect all have to be thought about. The whole process of producing machine translation is a very long one, and until fairly recently it was done only by big organizations, major companies, that have tremendous resources to both gather the data and to do all the machine learning for training of these systems. However, in the last few years, a number of university projects and open source projects for machine learning and machine translation have become available. So there is more hope for Indigenous communities to possibly get machine translation going in the future. However, the road is long if people are going to get to machine translation for many of the languages beyond the very dominant languages. Another area that the LDI has worked on is finding open source materials that can be made ready for translation. One of the key findings of education is that when children are taught in the language that they speak at home, at least for the first few years of their formal schooling, they learn much better. In many cases, however, children are attending schools in which the dominant language of the country or the region is the one in which the education is done. So people in West Africa might be educated in French even though no one in the family speaks French at home. This poses a huge barrier to students who are just starting to learn and is very discouraging. The idea of the educational materials with open source is that communities would have materials available that could be translated for free. The LDI may find translators who can help people with these translations and produce materials that could be handouts or on science, mathematics, or other topics. And these could be then used by teachers in the native languages of the children so that they can learn better. We haven't worked very much on getting specific materials on how to teach the community's language itself. That's another complicated topic. But by accumulating materials that the students can use and by developing materials to train teachers in how to use them, and also to provide additional resources such as maps and posters and other things that can be put around the classroom and given to students to take home, we hope that this can have an impact on communities wanting to educate their children. And a final thing that LDI can do is through Translation Commons, we can connect translators who would be able to partner with community educators. Another aspect of Translation Commons through the LDI is that translators and interpreters are already connected to Translation Commons. And so we are working on training programs so that people can learn how to work with Indigenous communities and develop the translations that are needed for many aspects of the digitization process. This could be as simple as developing word lists or helping develop dictionaries, but it also may be very practical uses, such as assisting communities in their own language in learning about healthcare that's available to them, or learning about the judicial system that applies to them, even though the main language used in these processes may not be the community's language. Other civil proceedings may need translation for people to understand them clearly. So the ability to communicate in the Indigenous languages and work with the governments and other organizations in the wider community is really important, and LDI hopes to help in this process. We also hope that this will facilitate commerce and development of small businesses. And of course, because people will be able to communicate more clearly with the wider communities and other communities. We think that this has a chance of promoting cultural exchange as well. We hope to continue our work with a community of practice. For the last year, approximately, professors from all over the world have been meeting monthly in Zoom calls to give presentations and hear from technologists and academics around the world. These have included presentations by people who are working directly with communities or whose native language is not one of the dominant languages. These have been talks that have been linguistic talks, but also technical talks. And these presentations given to people all over the world by people from all over the world have helped create a community that is working together and learning about the needs and capabilities that are necessary for language digitization. It's also prompted a lot of good discussions about best practices and how they work in different places around the world. And of course, it's always exciting when we hear about good results from these communities. And in addition, there's a lot of feedback and encouragement of the people who are working with language digitization around the world. We have one case study that we'd like to talk about today. The Sunamur language is spoken by 20 to 30,000 people in eastern Nepal and also Sikkim, which is a part of India. Sikkim is between Bhutan and the eastern part of Nepal. From an initial contact at the International Year of Indigenous Languages meeting in Mexico City between Dev Sunawar, who is a speaker and an advocate for his language, the goals and needs of this language were outlined, and we began working to find ways that the Sunawar language could advance along the digitization process. We developed some prototypes of keyboards. We used some fonts that they had developed initially, and we worked with their writing system, which had been defined but had not been standardized at this point. It turns out that there was a Unicode proposal to standardize the Sunawar writing system, but it had never gone very far. But just in this last year, with people from LDI working with the Sunawar groups, the proposal has been reinvigorated, and we hope that this will soon lead to standardization of the Sunawar character set into the Unicode standard very soon. This has also been exciting because the Sunawar Welfare Society is a group that is in Nepal and also working in Sikkim, and this cross-border organization is not only working on the language technology, but they are developing classes to encourage people to read and write in their local writing system. Although Sunawar is written in the Devanagari script, they are very proud that they have their own script and are excited about using this for their language and for their community. And we're beginning to see that this community is developing newspapers and posters and working very hard to increase the use of their language and their writing system. And this is increasing not only pride in their community, but also increasing cross-border connections between people who have been separated by or into the different countries. We hope we've given you a little bit of an idea of the kinds of things that the LDI is doing. With such a big job ahead of us and huge goals of digitizing every language that on the earth and getting everyone to the same place, being able to use their language online the way they want to, just as the big languages are. It shouldn't be surprising to you that we have a team that we would love to grow, because there are so many needs and we want talented and excited people to participate. If you join the Translation Commons Language Digitization Initiative work, You'll learn more about our webinars and resources, and perhaps you'll find a place where you can present your own ideas and your work to others and really get connected with people around the world. Get started on working on an actual project, and you work with the language community. There are many language communities around the world that know that they need and want to use their languages online, but they don't have the technical skills or the linguistic tools to actually do this themselves. So partnerships are extremely important, and we've seen that when there is a community and an academic partner and a technical partner all involved, this helps people move through the Unicode standardization process. It helps people develop keyboard layouts. It helps find people who are willing to develop fonts and other tools that are necessary, and more sophisticated things such as dictionaries and so on. If you want to join our team, of course, we'll want to hear about your area of interest and expertise, and you can not only support what we're doing now, but expand the scope of what the LDI is actually doing. I want to thank you very much. Jeannette and Krista at Translation Commons would be very happy to hear from you, get your ideas, and we hope consider joining the Language Digitization Initiative. Thank you very much.
Brilliant stuff, Jeannette. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Happy International Day.
Same to you. Happy International Translation Day. Well, great to have you here. Great to have you here on this live Q&A. So I've got a couple of questions for you. First of all, I've got a comment. Really, this is quite a big job, isn't it?
It is. It is. There are so many languages that need digitization, and there's so many organizations that do little bits of pieces around, and putting it all together in the decade is going to be a huge project.
So how do you prioritize with so many different languages? How does that work within your organization?
So first of all, we as you know, a nonprofit organization working with UNESCO, we would never digitize a language unless the community wants it digitized. Mm-hmm. So we do not instigate digitization. But for example, the Sunuwar community that Craig mentioned just 2 slides ago, they came to us and they needed help. And in a conversation, we said, yes, this is something exactly that we can do and help you. And by piloting this specific, community's endeavor to digitize, we're actually documenting it and creating resources. So through the language technology framework that UNESCO is going to have in place on the UNESCO website and resources, we're going to have all these documentations and guidelines and everything we're creating, the videos and all the tutorials, so the communities themselves can see them. And then they can reach out to us and say, can you help us? We don't have the experts, so we understand what needs to be done, but we still can't do it. We still need help. And at that point, we're going to, pair them with people. If it is the adoption of their script in, let's say, an Apple iPhone, then we'll put them in contact with the right people at Apple. If it is a proposal for Unicode, we'll put them in contact with the right people in Unicode and so forth.
Wonderful. And how do you think, in general terms, that the decade of Indigenous languages is going to affect the languages industry as a whole?
I believe that it's going to put languages as a profession on the map. At the moment, it seems that we're a part of the supply chain. When a paying customer wants a translation, we do it, we offer it, we enable it, but at the same time, we are not considered to be a vital, element of the globalization. We're just like a small link. Yeah. But when you bring together the decade, where they're talking about the culture, they're talking about what language contains, which is all those unwritten things that we linguists have been talking about for ages. I think it's going to bring, our industry and our professionalism, put it on the map, and help people understand that it's not just a side thing that we do to enable communication because we get paid, but it's something which is vital to our human rights and to our humanity.
Wonderful, wonderful. And how long does this process take, Jeannette? How long does it take to digitize a script, for example?
Oh, that's a very good question. It does take a long time. The biggest problem for digitizing a brand new script is that it needs to have enough documentation for the technical people to be able to, encode the script. And that encoding, once it happens, cannot change. So if they change the font, or if they say, we don't like this font, we want another font, or this sound is better in a different font, the process is very difficult to change that. So that's why Unicode insists in a full stability of the script and the language before they do the script encoding. And that stability is what takes a long time. Because when the communities are doing a proposal, they come up with all sorts of little things that they need to correct. And in correcting them or in establishing them, they go back to the community. They need to get the adoption of the community, then to prove that this is the way it should be, and then the proposal can go through. So that can take up to 5 years sometimes. Wow. Very, very occasionally, it'll be done very, very quickly. And a lot of the times, it's not the first proposal that goes through, it's the second, and so on. And then after the script is being encoded, creating the phones, which are part of the Unicode standard, can take another year. Maybe 2, depending on the community's ability and access to technical people. The keyboard is fairly easy to do, and it can be done not in conjunction or not in a linear way. It can be done at any time, so people can actually download a keyboard on their phone and start using it. And then start having some content in their own languages and doing texts, basically. But when it comes to having the various companies adopt the script, like, for example, Office, Word, or Excel sheets, and Google Docs and all of this, that can take even longer time. And the community will need to, communicate with all these companies. So it is a lengthy process. It can take, 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit of patience is required, I think. So, but fantastic. And Jeannette, just one more question. And how can people actually help in this process? Let's talk a little bit about that, please.
Absolutely. So first of all, we're all passionate about language, and the team understands that how we feel for our language is how everybody feels for their language. So we want to go out of our way to help every language have all these opportunities that we have. And we need people that feel the same way, that are able to understand the problems and just help in any possible way. We need project managers, we need advisory board people, we need people that are going to be speaking with the communities, trained anthropologists, or we need interpreters, we need translators to translate our documentation, which once we create a document from scratch through the experts' expertise, right? We need that then translated in at least the 6 dominant languages that the UN, uses, because that way we will know that the reach through these 6 languages is going to be global. So yes, we need a lot of help in many, many ways, but administration help, we need technologists to create templates that will be open source and free for the communities to pick on. there is no end to the amount of help we need.
Brilliant, brilliant. And the easiest way for people to get in touch, I know we've shared the details before, but let's just, one last time, what's the best email or the best contact for people?
So first of all, they can email me, Jeannette at translationcommons.org, JEANNETTE at translationcommons.org. And a second email that people can have is Krista, KRISTA at translationcommons.org. And we will get in touch with straight away. We will respond.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Jeannette. It's been fantastic talking to you as always. And thank you for your contribution to International Translation Day. And thank you to your contribution to the industry as a whole, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having us and showcasing our work. Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.